The gunshots echoed in the distance as Madeline Sutton clutched her niece and nephew to her chest, her heart pounding so violently she feared it might burst from her ribcage. Blood stained the hem of her skirt, not her own, but her sister's, a cruel reminder of what she'd just witnessed and what she was now running from. "Auntie Maddie, I'm scared," 7-year-old Emma whimpered, her small fingers digging into Madeline's arm. "Hush now," Madeline whispered, pulling the children deeper into the concealing shadows of the alley behind Deer Lodge's general store. 10-year-old Thomas stood stoically beside her, his young face set in grim determination that no child his age should ever have to display. "We just need to stay quiet until the stage leaves." The year was 1878, and Madeline had never imagined her life would come to this, hiding in shadows with her sister's children, their mother's body not yet cold in their family home at the edge of town. Frederick Holloway, her sister Caroline's husband, had finally done what he'd threatened for years. The liquor had taken him completely this time, and Caroline had paid the ultimate price for trying to protect her children from his rage. Madeline had arrived just as the unthinkable happened, just in time to grab the children and flee through the back door while Frederick, in his drunken state, was still trying to comprehend what he had done. Now they needed to get as far from Deer Lodge, Montana as possible before Frederick sobered up enough to come looking for them, or worse, before the law arrested him and separated the children. "The stage to Helena leaves in 15 minutes, Madeline whispered. "We'll be on it." "What about Papa?" Thomas asked, his voice steady despite the slight tremor in his hands. Madeline swallowed hard. "Your Papa. He's not well, Thomas, you know that. We need to go away for a while." "He killed Mama," Thomas stated flatly. "I saw it." Emma began to sob quietly, and Madeline pulled her closer. "Yes," she admitted, "there was no protecting them from a truth they'd witnessed with their own eyes, and that's why we must leave. Now." With the few dollars she'd managed to grab from the small tin where she kept her sewing earnings, along with Caroline's wedding ring she'd slipped from her sister's finger in a final act of defiance against Frederick, Madeline hoped they could make it to Helena. Beyond that, she had no plan. As they crept toward the stage coach office, Madeline froze at the sound of familiar voices. Sheriff Graves and his deputy were standing outside, deep in conversation with the stage driver. "Keep an eye out for a woman with 2 young ones," the sheriff was saying. "Frederick Holloway claims his sister-in-law kidnapped his children after some kind of dispute." "Dispute?" the deputy scoffed. "Doc Wilson just rode out to their place, says Caroline Holloway's been beaten to death." "All the more reason to find those kids," Sheriff Graves replied grimly. "They're witnesses." Madeline's blood ran cold. They couldn't take the stage now, not with the law looking for them. Frederick must have sobered up enough to concoct a story, and with his standing as a successful rancher, people would believe him over a spinster seamstress. She pulled the children back into the shadows, her mind racing. They needed transportation, money, and time, none of which she had in abundance. "Miss Sutton?" A deep voice behind her nearly stopped her heart. Madeline spun around, instinctively pushing the children behind her as she faced a tall man in a worn leather vest and dusty hat. It took her a moment to recognize Yates Norwood, owner of the neighboring ranch to Frederick's. She'd seen him in town occasionally, nodding politely but rarely speaking more than a few words. His blue eyes took in her disheveled appearance, the frightened children, and the blood on her skirt in one quick assessment. "Mr. Norwood," she managed, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "I heard what happened at the Holloway place," he said quietly. "Frederick's already spinning his tale for anyone who'll listen." Madeline straightened her spine. "Then you should go tell the sheriff where we are. I'm sure there's a reward." Instead of answering, Yates Norwood glanced toward the stage coach office, then back at the small, trembling family before him. His expression softened imperceptibly. "I have room for all of you," he said, nodding toward the wagon hitched at the end of the alley. "My ranch is heading north away from Helena. Nobody would think to look for you there." Madeline stared at him suspiciously. "Why would you help us? A shadow crossed his face. Let's just say I know Frederick Holloway's true character better than most. Emma tugged at Madeline's skirt. Auntie, the sheriff's coming this way. There was no time for deliberation. With one last glance at the approaching lawman, Madeline nodded quickly. Thank you, Mr. Norwood. Yates led them swiftly to his wagon, helping lift the children into the back and covering them with an old tarp before assisting Madeline onto the bench seat beside him. Keep your head down, he instructed, handing her a wide-brimmed hat. And call me Yates. I reckon we're past formalities now. As they rolled casually past the sheriff, Yates tipped his hat respectfully. Afternoon, Sheriff. Trouble in town? Sheriff Graves barely glanced at them. Nothing for you to worry about, Norwood, just looking for some folks. Well, good hunting to you then, Yates replied easily, clicking to his horses to move a bit faster once they were past. Madeline hardly dared breathe until they were well beyond the town limits, the buildings of Deer Lodge growing smaller behind them. Only then did she allow herself to check on the children huddled beneath the tarp. It's all right now, she told them, though she wasn't entirely sure of that herself. We're safe for the moment. Thomas's eyes were suspicious as he emerged. Can we trust him, Aunt Mattie? Before she could answer, Yates spoke without turning. No, boy, you probably shouldn't, but right now I'm the only chance you've got. His honesty was oddly reassuring. Madeline studied his profile as he drove the strong jaw, shadowed with several days' worth of beard, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun, and the set of his mouth that suggested he wasn't a man given to frivolous conversation. How far is your ranch? She asked. Half-day's ride north, he replied. It's not much to look at, but it's far enough from Holloway's influence that you'll have time to figure out your next move. And what do you want in return, Mr. Norwood? Madeline asked directly. In her 28 years, she'd learned that men rarely offered assistance without expecting something in payment. He glanced at her then, something like amusement flickering in his eyes. For starters, it's just Yates, and I don't want anything except maybe the truth when you're ready to tell it. As the wagon rumbled north through the Montana wilderness, Madeline kept her gaze on the horizon, wondering if she'd just made the wisest decision of her life or the most dangerous one. The journey to Yates Norwood's ranch was largely silent. Madeline kept the children close, whispering reassurances whenever Emma's eyes welled with tears or Thomas's jaw clenched too tightly. For his part, Yates focused on the road, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife to distract the children. That's Wolf Creek Pass up ahead, he told them as the wagon approached a narrow gap between two rugged hills. Legend says a pack of wolves held off an entire hunting party there back in '58. Emma's eyes widened. Are there still wolves? Not so many these days, Yates replied, his voice gentling when he addressed the girl. Folks have hunted most of them out. Good, Emma whispered. Not good, Thomas corrected solemnly. Wolves keep the deer from eating all the plants. Papa said, he stopped abruptly, his young face clouding over as he remembered that nothing his father had taught him mattered anymore. Madeline squeezed his shoulder. You're right about the wolves, Thomas. Nature needs balance. Yates glanced at the boy with newfound respect. You know about that, do you? Thomas shrugged, but Madeline could see he appreciated the acknowledgement. I read books. As they crested a ridge in the late afternoon, Yates pointed ahead. There it is, Norwood Ranch. The property spread before them wasn't the largest Madeline had seen, but it had a tidiness that suggested careful stewardship. The main house was modest but solid, with a wide porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Several outbuildings clustered nearby, and a corral held about a dozen horses. Fields stretched beyond where cattle grazed in the distance. It's beautiful, Madeline said honestly. Something like pride crossed Yates's face. It's getting there. Took it over 5 years ago when my pa passed. Been working to build it up proper since then. As they approached, a weathered man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He eyed the wagon with obvious curiosity. That's Samuel, Yates explained. My foreman, known him since I was knee-high, he's the only help I've got besides some seasonal hands during roundup. Will he? Is it safe for him to know about us? Madeline asked anxiously. Yates's expression grew serious. Samuel's loyalty isn't for sale at any price, but if you'd prefer, I won't explain everything right away. When they pulled up to the house, Samuel approached, his eyes taking in the unexpected guests with undisguised interest. "Didn't know we were expecting company, boss," he said, his voice gravelly from years of trail dust. "Wasn't planned," Yates replied, jumping down from the wagon. "Miss Sutton and her niece and nephew will be staying with us for a spell." He gave Samuel a look that clearly communicated more would be explained later. "Could you see to the horses while I get them settled?" Samuel nodded, understanding passing between the men. "Evening, madam," he tipped his hat to Madeline. "Young uns." Inside, the house was surprisingly comfortable. Simple furnishings filled the main room, but everything was clean and well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and bookshelves lined another filled with volumes that immediately caught Thomas's attention. "It's just me here most days," Yates explained, seeming slightly embarrassed by Madeline's scrutiny. "Samuel has his own cabin down by the creek. There are 2 spare bedrooms upstairs, one for you and the little one, and one for the boy if that suits." "It's more than generous," Madeline replied, overwhelmed by his kindness. "But I don't want to put you out of your home." "You're not." He gestured toward the back of the house. "Kitchen's through there, not much in it fancy-wise, but there's food enough. I'll bring your things up." "We don't have any things," Emma said softly. "We left in a hurry." Something dark flickered across Yates's face before he knelt to the girl's level. "Well now, that's easily fixed. I reckon there might be some things in the attic that could help until we can get to town for proper supplies." While Yates showed them around, Madeline tried to quiet the voice in her head questioning her decision to trust this near stranger. Everything about him suggested decency, but she'd been fooled before. Her sister had believed Frederick Holloway was a good man once too. That evening, after a simple but filling supper that Yates prepared himself, "Can't claim to be much of a cook, but I can manage not to poison folks," Madeline finally got the children settled in their rooms. Emma had cried herself to sleep, clutching a rag doll Yates had unearthed from a trunk, while Thomas lay staring at the ceiling, refusing comfort but accepting her kiss on his forehead. When she came back downstairs, she found Yates sitting at the table, a cup of coffee before him and another waiting for her. "They're asleep," he asked. Thomas is, processing." She sank into the chair, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "Smart boy, sees more than he lets on." Yates pushed the coffee toward her. "You should know that Samuel rode into town after you went up. He'll bring news and whatever supplies you might need." Alarm shot through her. "Is that safe?" "Samuel knows how to be discreet. Besides, folks need to see him in town regular-like or they'll wonder." Madeline wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I owe you an explanation." "You don't owe me anything," Yates countered, "but I reckon it might help me keep you all safe if I knew what happened." The whole story poured out of her, then Caroline's marriage to Frederick Holloway 12 years earlier, the gradual change in him as drinking took over, the bruises Caroline tried to hide, Madeline's attempts to convince her sister to leave. Then the horror of that morning, arriving for her regular visit to find Frederick in a drunken rage, Caroline trying to shield the children, the sickening sound of her head hitting the stone hearth. "I got the children out the back while he was still. While he was looking at what he'd done," she finished, her voice hollow. "He didn't even see us leave, but he must have realized soon after." Yates had listened without interruption, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment. "I knew he was a mean drunk," he finally said. "Didn't know how bad it had gotten." "Caroline was private about her suffering," Madeline said, "proud." "And now you're afraid they'll hang him and send the children to an orphanage," Yates concluded. Madeline nodded. "Or worse, that he'll convince people it was an accident and get custody of them again. Either way, they lose everything." Her voice broke. "They've already lost their mother." Yates's hand twitched on the table as if he might reach for hers, but he refrained. You did right by those kids, getting them out. Whatever happens next, remember that. I don't know what happens next, she admitted. I had no plan beyond escaping Deer Lodge. You can stay here as long as you need to, Yates said simply. Nobody will look for you this far north, at least not right away. Madeline studied him carefully. Why are you really helping us, Yates? You barely know me. Something flickered in his eyes, a shadow of old pain. Let's just say I understand what those children are going through. My own father wasn't much different from Frederick Holloway. He rolled up his sleeve to reveal an old, twisted scar on his forearm. Got this when I was about Thomas's age. Tried to stop him from going after my mother with a hot poker. Madeline's hand flew to her mouth. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. He rolled his sleeve down. But some memories don't fade, and I won't stand by while history repeats itself, not if I can help it. In that moment, looking into his eyes across the worn kitchen table, Madeline felt something shift between them, a recognition, a shared understanding of pain and resilience. Thank you, she said softly. Not just for the shelter, but for believing us. Get some rest, Miss Sutton. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles, I expect. As Madeline climbed the stairs to check on the children once more, she realized that for the first time since that morning, she felt something close to hope. The next few days established a tentative rhythm at the Norwood ranch. Samuel returned from town with supplies and news. Frederick Holloway had been arrested for Caroline's murder, but was loudly proclaiming his innocence, claiming she had fallen during an argument. He was also offering a reward for information about his children's whereabouts, painting Madeline as an unstable spinster who had long been jealous of his marriage. Most folks don't believe him, Samuel reported gruffly. Caroline was well liked and people aren't blind. They saw the bruises over the years. Still, the news was unsettling. Madeline tried to shield the children from these developments while helping them process their grief. Emma alternated between tearful questions about her mother and moments of childish distraction. Thomas remained stoic during the day, but Madeline often heard him crying softly at night. To her surprise, Yates proved remarkably patient with the children. He gave Thomas small responsibilities around the ranch, collecting eggs, helping feed the horses that made the boy stand taller. For Emma, he whittled small wooden animals and taught her the names of wildflowers growing near the house. One evening, about a week after their arrival, Madeline found Yates sitting on the porch with Thomas, both of them silent as they watched the sunset paint the Montana sky in spectacular colors. You know, Yates said quietly to the boy, it's all right to be angry about what happened. Thomas stiffened. I'm not angry. No, I would be. Yates kept his gaze on the horizon. I was when I was about your age. Thomas glanced at him. What happened to your pa? Died in a bar fight when I was 15. By then I was big enough that he couldn't hurt my ma anymore, but that didn't undo the damage already done. Did you hate him? Thomas asked, his voice small. Yates considered this carefully. For a long time, yes, still do in some ways. But I learned that hating him used up energy I needed for other things like taking care of my ma, learning to run this ranch, figuring out how to be a better man than he was. Madeline held her breath, watching from the doorway as Thomas absorbed this. I want him to hang, the boy finally whispered, the words seeming to burst out of him. Is that wicked? No, Yates said firmly. It's honest. What he did was evil, Thomas. Don't let anyone tell you different or make you feel bad for your feelings about it. When Thomas's shoulders began to shake with suppressed sobs, Yates did something that made Madeline's heart constrict. He simply placed his hand on the boy's shoulder, not pulling him into an unwanted embrace, not telling him not to cry, just offering a steady presence. Thomas leaned into that hand slightly, and they sat together as the darkness fell. Madeline slipped back inside, giving them privacy while her mind whirled with new impressions of the quiet rancher who had taken them in. Later that night, after the children were asleep, she found Yates at the kitchen table reviewing ledgers by lamplight. That was kind, what you did for Thomas, she said softly. Yates looked up, seemingly embarrassed to have been observed. Boy needs to know his feelings are valid. Have you always been so wise with children? She asked, taking the seat across from him. A faint smile touched his lips. Hardly, never spent much time around them before you all arrived. He closed the ledger. How are you holding up, Miss Sutton? Madeline, she corrected him. Or Maddie if you prefer, and I'm managing, taking each hour as it comes, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. It's a sound approach. I've been thinking, she ventured cautiously, about what happens next. I can't impose on your hospitality forever. You're not imposing, he said simply. The children are settling in and you're… He paused, seemingly searching for words. You're good to have around. Heat rose in her cheeks at the awkward compliment. Nevertheless, I need to make plans. If Frederick is convicted, the children will legally be my responsibility. I need to find work, a place to live. There's work here, Yates said, the words coming quickly as if they surprised even him. The place could use a woman's touch, and I've been meaning to hire someone to help with the cooking and keeping when roundup comes. The hands will be grateful for decent meals. Madeline stared at him. You're offering me employment, room and board for all of you, plus wages, he clarified. It's not charity. This place has needed proper looking after since my mother passed 3 years ago. The proposal was unexpected but not unwelcome. Still, caution made her ask, and the children? Thomas is still young and Emma younger. Thomas is old enough to learn ranching if he's interested. Emma can help where she's able and attend school when she's a bit older. There's a small schoolhouse about 5 miles from here. Yates leaned forward, his expression earnest. I know it's not what you planned, but it would give you all time to heal without worrying about tomorrow's bread. The offer was tempting, perhaps too tempting. Madeline had never imagined herself living on a ranch, but the past week had shown her glimpses of a life that held its own beauty. More concerning was her growing awareness of Yates himself, his quiet strength, his unexpected gentleness with the children, the way his rare smile transformed his weathered face. May I think about it? She asked. Of course, he nodded, standing. No rush to decide, you're welcome here regardless. As he gathered his papers, their hands brushed briefly, sending an unexpected jolt through her. Their eyes met for a moment before he nodded goodnight and left her alone with her thoughts. That night, Madeline lay awake long after Emma had fallen asleep beside her. The idea of staying at Norwood Ranch permanently both frightened and attracted her. She had always been independent, supporting herself with her seamstress work in Deer Lodge. The prospect of becoming essentially a housekeeper for a bachelor rancher would raise eyebrows, but then, she had already fled town under suspicious circumstances. Respectability might be a luxury she could no longer afford. More troubling was her growing awareness of Yates himself. At 34, he was a few years older than her, and carrying burdens from his past that she recognized in the quiet moments when he thought no one was watching. She couldn't afford complications, not with 2 grieving children depending on her. Yet as she finally drifted to sleep, Madeline found herself picturing a future here, Emma running through fields of wildflowers, Thomas learning to ride alongside Yates, herself finding purpose beyond mere survival. It was a dangerous dream, perhaps, but in that moment it felt like a lifeline. Summer gave way to early autumn, and still no word came about Frederick Holloway's trial. According to Samuel's discreet inquiries in town, the proceedings had been delayed as Frederick's wealthy family hired expensive lawyers from Helena to defend him. Meanwhile, life at Norwood Ranch settled into a comfortable routine. Madeline had accepted Yates's offer of employment and threw herself into transforming the bachelor household. The kitchen gleamed with newfound cleanliness. Curtains appeared at windows that had been bare for years, and meals became occasions for conversation rather than mere sustenance. The children, too, were slowly healing. Thomas followed Yates everywhere, soaking up knowledge about horses, cattle, and the land with quiet intensity. Emma had discovered a love for the chickens and gathered eggs each morning, singing softly to the hens. On a clear September morning, Madeline was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard hoofbeats approaching. Her heart leaped into her throat. They rarely had visitors this far out, and her first thought was always of discovery. Yates appeared from the barn, rifle casually in hand as he walked toward the front of the house. Madeline hurried to gather the children, hushing Emma's questions as she ushered them inside. Through the window, she watched as a rider came into view, a young man in a deputy's uniform. Her fingers tightened on Emma's shoulder as Yates stepped forward to greet him. The conversation was brief. The deputy handed over what appeared to be a letter, exchanged a few more words with Yates, then tipped his hat and rode away. Only when he was completely out of sight did Madeline relax her grip on Emma. "Stay inside with Thomas," she instructed the girl before stepping out onto the porch. Yates was walking back toward the house, his expression unreadable as he studied the envelope in his hands. "Who was that?" Madeline asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Deputy Wilson from the county seat," Yates replied. "Bringing official mail." He handed her the envelope. "It's addressed to you." Madeline stared at her name written in formal script on the front. How did they know I was here? They didn't. "It was sent to all the outlying ranches in the territory." Yates nodded toward the letter. "Best open it." With trembling fingers, Madeline broke the seal and unfolded the official document inside. As she read, her legs weakened beneath her and she sank onto the porch steps. "What is it?" Yates asked, concern evident in his voice. "Frederick Holloway was found guilty of Caroline's murder yesterday," she said, her voice hollow with disbelief. "He's been sentenced to hang next month." Yates let out a long breath. "That's good news, isn't it? There's more." She looked up at him, tears blurring her vision. "The court has officially granted me guardianship of the children. Judge Wilkins apparently remembered my petition from last year when I tried to help Caroline leave." She pressed the letter to her chest. "They're mine now, legally mine." Without thinking, she rose and threw her arms around Yates, overcome with relief. He stiffened momentarily in surprise before his arms came around her, holding her steady as she cried against his shoulder. "It's over," she whispered. "They're safe." "Yes," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "They are." When she realized how forward she was being, Madeline pulled back, wiping her eyes. "I'm sorry. I don't apologize," Yates said quietly. "Not for feeling relief after what you've been through." Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them, a tension that had been building over the weeks, unacknowledged until this moment. The spell was broken by Emma's voice from the doorway. "Auntie Maddie, is everything all right?" Madeline turned, opening her arms to the little girl. "Yes, darling. Everything is all right now. Come here, I have something important to tell you and Thomas." That evening, after explaining to the children as gently as possible that their father would face justice for what he'd done to their mother, and that they would officially remain in her care, Madeline sat on the porch watching the stars appear. The children were finally asleep after an emotional day of questions and tears, but also moments of cautious hope. Yates joined her, offering a cup of tea before settling into the chair beside hers. "Thank you," she said, accepting the steaming mug. "For everything. I don't know how we would have survived without your help." "You'd have found a way," he replied. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Madeline." She smiled at his use of her given name, something he'd begun doing more frequently in recent weeks. "Perhaps. But I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cricket song and distant lowing of cattle the only sounds. "What will you do now?" Yates finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Now that the legal matters are settled, you could return to Deer Lodge if you wanted, or move on to another town." Madeline looked at him in surprise. "Do you want us to leave?" "No," he said quickly, then more measured. "No, that's not what I meant. Just that you have options now that you didn't before." She considered this. "The children are settled here, Thomas is thriving under your guidance, and Emma has stopped having nightmares." She paused. "Unless you'd prefer your house back to yourself." "That's not it at all," Yates said firmly. "Having you all here has been." He seemed to search for the right words. It's made this place feel like a home again, not just a house where I sleep between work days. The admission hung in the air between them, more revealing than perhaps he'd intended. Then if it's all the same to you, Madeline said softly, I'd like to stay, at least for now. Relief crossed his face. I'd like that too. When their eyes met this time, neither looked away. Madeline felt her heart quicken as Yates slowly reached across the space between their chairs, his calloused hand covering hers. The touch was gentle, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she turned her hand upward, her fingers intertwining with his. They sat that way for a long time, watching the stars and holding hands like shy youngsters, both aware that something important had changed between them, something neither was quite ready to name, but neither wished to deny. The weeks following Frederick Holloway's sentencing brought an unexpected peace to Norwood Ranch. With the threat of discovery gone and the children's future secure, Madeline found herself settling more fully into ranch life. She planted a kitchen garden, redecorated the rarely used parlor, and began teaching Emma to read using the books from Yates's surprisingly extensive library. Thomas continued to shadow Yates, his admiration for the rancher evident in the way he mimicked his stance and speech. For his part, Yates showed remarkable patience, explaining everything from how to mend a fence to why certain stars guided travelers at night. The change in Yates himself was perhaps most remarkable. The reserved, sometimes taciturn man who had first taken them in gradually gave way to someone who laughed more easily, who told stories at dinner, who sometimes played his harmonica on the porch in the evenings while Emma danced and Thomas pretended not to enjoy the music. As October painted the surrounding hills in brilliant colors, Madeline found herself watching Yates when he wasn't looking, noticing the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how his hands were both powerful and gentle, how he always seemed aware of where she was in a room. Since that night on the porch, something unspoken had grown between them. Hands would brush when passing dishes at dinner. Their eyes would meet across the room and linger. Once, when helping her down from the wagon after a trip to the mercantile, his hands had remained at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and she'd felt the warmth of them through her dress long after. Yet neither had spoken of these moments, as if acknowledging them might somehow break the spell. One crisp afternoon, Yates announced he needed to check on the cattle in the north pasture before the weather turned. I thought Thomas might come along, he added, glancing at Madeline for permission. Be good for him to learn more about the herd before winter sets in. Thomas looked up eagerly from the book he'd been reading. Can I, Aunt Maddie? Madeline smiled at his enthusiasm. Of course, but mind what Mr. Norwood tells you and wear your heavy coat. What about me? Emma pouted. I want to go too. Yates knelt to her level, his voice serious. I need your help here, Miss Emma. Someone has to help your aunt with the apple pies we're making for supper. Those cattle can wait, but pie crust waits for no man. Emma considered this gravely before nodding. All right. But next time I get to go. It's a deal, Yates agreed, rising. He caught Madeline's grateful look and winked, causing a blush to rise in her cheeks. After they'd gone, Madeline and Emma set about making the promised pies. The little girl was covered in flour and giggling as she rolled out dough when a knock at the door startled them both. Samuel rarely knocked, and they weren't expecting visitors. Cautiously, Madeline wiped her hands and went to answer, instinctively telling Emma to stay in the kitchen. A well-dressed woman in her 50s stood on the porch, her expression severe and assessing as she looked Madeline up and down. May I help you? Madeline asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. I'm looking for Yates Norwood, the woman said crisply. I'm his Aunt Margaret Norwood. Surprise rendered Madeline momentarily speechless. Yates had never mentioned any family beyond his deceased parents. He's not here at present, she finally managed. He's out checking the herd with my nephew. The woman's eyebrows rose. And you are, Madeline Sutton, I'm the housekeeper. Margaret Norwood's eyes narrowed slightly. Housekeeper, I see. Her tone suggested she saw rather more than Madeline might wish. "May I come in? I've traveled from Bozeman to speak with my nephew on an urgent family matter." Reluctantly, Madeline stepped aside. "Of course. Please make yourself comfortable in the parlor. I'll prepare some tea." As Margaret Norwood swept past her into the house, Madeline felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Yates had never mentioned an aunt, urgent family matters, or connections in Bozeman. What other parts of his life remained mysteries to her in the kitchen, she found Emma peering anxiously around the doorframe. "Who is that lady?" she whispered. "Mr. Norwood's aunt," Madeline explained, keeping her voice low. "She's come to visit him." "She looks mean," Emma observed with a child's blunt honesty. Madeline couldn't disagree but merely said, "Mind your manners if she speaks to you, Emma. Now help me prepare this tea tray." When they entered the parlor, Margaret was examining the room with the critical eye of someone taking inventory. "I must say, the place looks considerably improved since my last visit," she remarked. Yates's mother never had much talent for homemaking, and after she passed, I feared the place would fall into complete disrepair. "Mr. Norwood maintains his property well," Madeline said, setting down the tea tray. Margaret's gaze shifted to Emma, who was half hiding behind Madeline's skirts. "And who is this?" "My niece, Emma," Madeline replied. "Emma, this is Mrs. Norwood." "Miss Norwood," the woman corrected. "I never married." Her expression softened slightly as she addressed Emma. "How do you do, young lady?" "Fine, thank you," Emma mumbled, clinging tighter to Madeline. "Emma, why don't you go finish the pie crusts while I speak with Miss Norwood?" Madeline suggested gently. Once the child had scurried away, Margaret fixed Madeline with an assessing stare. "So, you're the woman people in town are talking about." Madeline froze in the act of pouring tea. "Pardon." "Oh yes. Word travels even to Bozeman. The seamstress who fled Deer Lodge with her sister's children after some terrible tragedy." Margaret accepted the teacup. "And somehow ended up here of all places." "It's not what you might be thinking," Madeline said stiffly. "Mr. Norwood kindly offered employment when we were in need, nothing more." Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "My dear, I've been around long enough to recognize when a man's household has a woman's touch that goes beyond mere employment." She sipped her tea. "I'm not here to judge. I'm merely curious about the woman who has apparently captivated my normally solitary nephew." Before Madeline could formulate a response, the sound of boots on the porch announced Yates's return. He entered with Thomas in tow, both flushed from the cold air and laughing about something until Yates spotted his aunt sitting in the parlor. "Aunt Margaret," he said, surprise evident in his voice. "This is unexpected." "Evidently," she replied dryly. "I see you've been keeping secrets, nephew." Yates's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Thomas, why don't you go help your sister in the kitchen?" Once the boy had gone, he turned to Madeline. "Would you mind giving us a moment?" Though curiosity burned within her, Madeline nodded and retreated to the kitchen, where the children immediately bombarded her with questions. "Who is that lady? Is Mr. Yates in trouble? Why does she look so grumpy?" "Hush now," Madeline soothed them. "It's just Mr. Norwood's aunt come to visit. Family business, that's all. Now let's finish these pies and give them some privacy." But as she worked, her mind raced with questions of her own. Why had Yates never mentioned an aunt? What urgent matter had brought her here now? And most troubling, what did it mean for them? In the parlor, voices occasionally rose loud enough for snatches of conversation to reach the kitchen. Completely irresponsible. "My decision to make. Consider your position." When Yates finally appeared in the kitchen doorway nearly an hour later, his expression was grim but resolute. "Madeline, would you join us?" he asked quietly, heart pounding. She wiped her hands on her apron. "Children, stay here and be good. I'll be back shortly." In the parlor, Margaret Norwood stood by the window, her back rigid with disapproval. When Madeline entered, Yates moved to stand beside her, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by his aunt. "Miss Sutton," Margaret began formally, "my nephew has explained your situation." While I sympathize with your circumstances, I must express concern about the arrangement here. Aunt Margaret believes our living situation is inappropriate, Yates said bluntly. Regardless of your employment status. Madeline felt heat rise in her cheeks. Of course it looked improper, a single woman living under the same roof as a bachelor, regardless of the children's presence. In her focus on safety and survival, she'd given little thought to how others might perceive their arrangement. I understand your concern, she said carefully. But I assure you, everything has been completely proper. Margaret's expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. Nevertheless, reputations are easily damaged, especially in small communities, and with Yates's new position, appearances matter more than ever. New position. Madeline glanced at Yates questioningly. He sighed. That's the other reason for my aunt's visit. My cousin Edward has passed away typhoid fever. He was meant to take over as the family's representative in the territorial legislature next session. And now that responsibility falls to you, Margaret finished. The only male Norwood of the right age and temperament, the governor himself has approved the appointment. Madeline felt as if the floor were shifting beneath her. Yates a territorial legislator. It would mean traveling to Helena, moving in political circles, becoming a public figure. Everything about it seemed at odds with the quiet rancher she had come to know, and where did it leave her and the children? I haven't accepted yet, Yates said firmly, his eyes on Madeline. Don't be ridiculous, his aunt scoffed. Of course you'll accept, it's your duty to the family name. I have other responsibilities now, he countered. Margaret's gaze shifted between them, understanding dawning in her eyes. I see. Well, that presents a problem, doesn't it? A territorial legislator cannot afford scandal and taking up with a woman fleeing justice. Madeline has done nothing wrong, Yates interrupted sharply. She protected those children when no one else would. Perhaps, but perception matters in politics, and the perception would be problematic. The implication hung in the air. Yates could have his political future, or he could have Madeline and the children, but not both. I think, Madeline said slowly, finding her voice, that Mr. Norwood and I need to discuss this privately. Margaret nodded, seemingly satisfied that she'd made her point. I'll be staying at the hotel in town for 2 days. The governor expects your answer by the end of the week. She gathered her things. I can see myself out. After she'd gone, silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts. You never mentioned an aunt, Madeline finally said. We're not close, Yates replied. Haven't spoken in years. She and my mother never got along, or a cousin in politics. Edward was more her protege than my cousin. I've met him maybe twice. He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. I never wanted any part of the family's political ambitions. Madeline's mind was racing. But now you're being asked to take his place. I don't have to accept, but it's an honor, isn't it? A chance to do real good for the territory. Yates moved closer, his eyes intent on hers. Madeline, listen to me. I have no interest in politics or Helena or anything that would take me away from. He stopped, seeming to catch himself. From what? She prompted softly. From this ranch, from the life I've built here. His voice lowered. From you and the children. The admission hung in the air between them, more direct than anything he'd said before. Yates, she began, uncertain what to say next. I don't want to be the reason you turn down such an opportunity. Your aunt is right, my presence here could complicate things for you. I don't care about complications, he said firmly. These past months, having you and the children here, it's shown me what I really want from life, and it isn't political appointments or social standing. He reached for her hands, holding them gently in his own. It's this. A home that feels alive, children's laughter in rooms that were silent too long. And you, Madeline, most of all you. Her heart thundered in her chest as he continued, words seemingly spilling out after months of careful restraint. I know it hasn't been long and you came here out of necessity, not choice. I know you might not feel the same, but I need you to know that he took a deep breath. I love you, and whatever happens with this appointment or anything else, that won't change. Tears welled in Madeline's eyes. After years of independence, of putting her sister's needs before her own, of never expecting love to find her, here it was, offered by a man who had proven his worth through actions, not just words. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself. Afraid to want something for myself after everything that happened." Relief washed over his face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned forward and kissed her, a gentle, questioning kiss that deepened when she responded. His arms went around her, pulling her close as years of loneliness seemed to dissolve between them. When they finally parted, both breathless, the sound of giggling from the doorway broke the moment. They turned to find Emma watching wide-eyed, with Thomas trying unsuccessfully to pull her away. "Are you going to marry Mr. Yates now, Auntie Maddie?" Emma asked innocently. Madeline blushed furiously, but before she could respond, Yates knelt down to the children's level. "That," he said seriously, "is something I would very much like to discuss with both of you. Because it wouldn't just be your aunt marrying me, it would be all of us becoming a family, and I wouldn't want that unless you were both agreeable." Thomas, ever the protective one, frowned slightly. "Would we still stay here at the ranch? Of course," Yates assured him. "This is your home now." "What about that lady who was here?" Emma asked. "She didn't seem to like us very much." Yates smiled gently. "My aunt has her own ideas about what's important, but I get to decide what matters to me, and that's you three. So you're not going to be that important political person?" Thomas asked perceptively. Yates and Madeline exchanged glances. "No," he said firmly. "I'm going to be exactly who I've always been, just a rancher, but hopefully a happier one with a proper family around him." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Madeline and Yates sat before the fire, her head resting against his shoulder as they discussed the future. "Are you certain about declining the appointment?" she asked. "I wouldn't want you to regret it." "I've never been more certain of anything," he replied, his arm tightening around her. "Politics would make me miserable. This, you, the children, our life here, this is what brings me joy." "What will your aunt say?" he chuckled. "She'll be furious. Might even disown me, which wouldn't be much of a loss considering we barely acknowledge each other as it is." Madeline traced patterns on his hand with her fingertips. "And what about us? Was that a proper proposal earlier, or should I keep waiting?" Yates shifted to look at her properly, his expression suddenly serious. "It wasn't how I planned it. I've had a ring in my desk drawer for 2 weeks, trying to find the perfect moment." Her eyes widened. "You have," he nodded, a hint of sheepishness in his smile. "Samuel helped me pick it out last time he was in Helena. Called me 10 kinds of fool for waiting so long to ask you, and were you? A fool, I mean." "The biggest kind," he admitted. "I should have told you how I felt weeks ago, but I was afraid you might feel obligated given your situation. And now I know better." He stood, pulling her up with him. "Wait here." He returned moments later with a small wooden box which he opened to reveal a simple gold band set with a modestly sized sapphire. "It reminded me of your eyes," he said softly, suddenly looking nervous. "If it's not to your liking, it's perfect," she interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. He took her hand, his own slightly unsteady. "Madeline Sutton, I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures. But I love you with everything I am, and I want to spend my life making you and those children happy. Will you marry me?" "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I will." As he slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, Madeline reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun in tragedy and desperation had transformed into something beautiful and hopeful, a second chance for all of them. In this quiet ranch house in the Montana wilderness, they had found not just safety, but home. The wedding took place on a bright November day, just as the first light snow dusted the mountains surrounding Norwood Ranch. It was a small affair by most standards, but perfect for them, held in the ranch house parlor with a handful of trusted friends in attendance. Samuel stood as Yates's best man, his weathered face beaming with approval. Emma, delighted with her role as flower girl, scattered late-blooming wildflowers preserved by Madeline, while Thomas proudly escorted his aunt down the stairs to where Yates waited before the minister from the nearby town. Madeline wore a simple cream-colored dress that she had sewn herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs that had once belonged to her mother. When Yates saw her, the look of wonder on his face told her more than words ever could about his feelings. The vows they exchanged were traditional, but spoken with such sincerity that even Samuel was seen discreetly wiping his eyes. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with a tenderness that promised a lifetime of devotion. "I now present to you Mr. and Mrs. Norwood," the minister announced to the small gathering. Emma immediately launched herself at them, wrapping her arms around their legs while Thomas approached more sedately but with an unmistakable smile of approval. "Are we really a proper family now?" Emma asked. Yates knelt down, bringing himself to her level. "We are indeed, Miss Emma, the most proper family I know." The celebration afterward was warm and joyful, a feast prepared by Madeline with help from the wives of neighboring ranchers. Music from a fiddle player Samuel had invited, and dancing that continued well into the evening. Through it all, Yates kept Madeline close as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. As their guests were departing, Samuel approached with a letter. "This came yesterday," he said, handing it to Yates. "Didn't want to trouble you with it before the ceremony." Yates recognized his aunt's handwriting immediately. With a sigh, he broke the seal and scanned the contents, then handed it to Madeline with a rueful smile. "It seems my cousin's position has been filled by someone more politically suitable," he read. "And my aunt wishes to inform me that I have been removed from the family will." "I'm sorry," Madeline said, though his expression showed no disappointment. "Don't be," Yates replied, wrapping an arm around her waist. "It's the easiest sacrifice I've ever made. This ranch is all I've ever wanted, and now I have far more than just land and cattle to make it a home." That night, after the children had finally been persuaded to sleep despite their excitement, Yates led Madeline to what had been his bedroom, now their bedroom. He'd made small changes she hadn't noticed during her cleaning: new curtains, a larger mirror on the bureau, a colorful quilt that he admitted somewhat sheepishly had been purchased from a traveling peddler specifically because it had all those flowers you like. The awkwardness that might have existed between two people, still learning each other's ways, dissolved in the genuine affection that had grown between them over the past months. Their coming together as husband and wife felt like both a culmination and a beginning, tender, passionate, and filled with promises for the future. Afterward, as they lay together in the quiet darkness, Madeline traced the strong line of his jaw with her fingertips. "Happy?" he asked, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she admitted. "A year ago I never would have pictured this life for myself." "No," he pulled her closer. "What did you picture?" She thought about her life in Deer Lodge, the small room above the dressmaker's shop, her days spent sewing for others, her evenings often spent with Caroline and the children, trying to provide whatever comfort she could in their difficult situation. "I suppose I expected to remain a seamstress, eventually taking over the shop when Mrs. Henley retired. I never thought much beyond making sure Caroline and the children were all right." She sighed softly. "I failed at that." "No," Yates said firmly, "you didn't fail. You did everything humanly possible for them, and now you're giving Thomas and Emma a life Caroline would be proud of." "We are," she corrected, nestling against his chest. "You're as much a part of their healing as I am." The winter that followed their wedding brought heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time, but within their home, warmth and happiness flourished. The children thrived under the combined care of Madeline and Yates, who proved to be as natural a father as he was a rancher. Thomas's interest in books expanded to include the practical knowledge of ranch management that Yates patiently shared. Emma's natural exuberance found outlets in helping Madeline with household tasks and in endless creative games that often left the adults laughing at her imagination. By spring, when the world began to thaw and green returned to the Montana landscape, another change was becoming apparent. Madeline's dresses needed letting out, and a subtle roundness to her figure confirmed what they had begun to suspect in late winter: their family would be growing by one more come autumn. When they told the children, their reactions were characteristically different. Emma was ecstatic, immediately peppering them with questions about whether it would be a boy or girl and what they would name it. Thomas was quieter, thoughtful. Later, Yates found him sitting alone on the porch steps, staring at the distant mountains. "Everything all right, son?" he asked, settling beside him. Thomas nodded slowly. "Just thinking about the baby, sort of." The boy fidgeted with a stick, drawing patterns in the dirt. "Will it be different when you have your own child, I mean?" Understanding dawned on Yates. "Thomas, look at me." He waited until the boy met his eyes. "You and Emma became my children the day I married your aunt in my heart. Even before that, this new baby won't change how I feel about either of you." "But it'll be your real child," Thomas persisted. "Your blood." "Blood isn't what makes a family," Yates said firmly. "Love is. Commitment is. The choice to stand by each other no matter what comes. I chose you and Emma just as surely as I chose your aunt, and nothing will ever change that." Thomas considered this, then asked hesitantly, "Can I still help you with the spring calving?" "I'm counting on it," Yates replied, relief evident in his smile. "I need your sharp eyes out there. Samuel says you've got a natural way with the animals." Pride straightened the boy's shoulders. "Really, he said that?" "He did. And Samuel doesn't give praise lightly." Yates stood, offering his hand. "Come on, your aunt's made apple dumplings, and if we don't hurry, I suspect Emma will have talked her way into an extra helping." As they walked back to the house together, Yates's hand resting lightly on Thomas's shoulder, Madeline watched from the window, one hand on her growing belly. The sight of them together, the boy, who had been so solemn and withdrawn, when they arrived now smiling up at the man, who had become his father in all the ways that mattered, filled her heart nearly to bursting. That night, as they lay in bed discussing names for the baby, Yates placed his hand on her stomach, wonder crossing his face as he felt a decisive kick. "Strong," he murmured, "just like its mother." Madeline covered his hand with hers. "I never thanked you properly, you know." "For what?" "For seeing us that day in Deer Lodge, for offering us shelter when we had nowhere else to turn." She turned to face him in the darkness. "You could have looked the other way like so many others did." "I couldn't," he said simply. "From the moment I saw you standing there, trying so hard to be brave for those children." He swallowed. "I knew I'd do anything to help you. I just never expected that helping you would save me too." "Save you? From loneliness, from a life half lived." He drew her closer. "I had this ranch, my work, but nothing that really mattered at the end of each day. You gave me purpose, Madeline, a family, love. We gave each other those things," she whispered, kissing him softly. "And now we're giving our children a home where they'll never know fear or want." In September, as the aspen trees turned gold against the Montana sky, Madeline gave birth to a healthy son they named James, after Yates's father. Unlike his father, however, little James would grow up surrounded by love and gentleness, with a sister who insisted on helping change his diapers, though her enthusiasm sometimes exceeded her skill, and a brother who solemnly promised to teach him everything about horses when he was big enough. As autumn deepened toward winter again, news reached them that Frederick Holloway had faced justice for his crimes. The knowledge brought a complex mix of emotions: relief that he could never harm them again, sorrow for the waste of a life that could have been lived differently, and finally, a sense of closure. On Christmas Eve, with snow falling gently outside and a fire crackling in the hearth, the family gathered in the parlor. Emma, now 8, played with a wooden doll house Yates had spent months crafting in secret. Thomas, 11 and growing taller by the day, sat reading one of his new books, occasionally glancing up to make sure baby James wasn't getting into mischief as he practiced his newly acquired crawling skills. Madeline, watching them all from her chair by the fire, felt a contentment so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Yates, noticing, moved to perch on the arm of her chair. "Happy tears or sad ones?" he asked quietly, brushing one away with his thumb. "Happy," she assured him. "I was just thinking about how far we've come. A year and a half ago, I thought my world had ended. I was running for my life for their lives with no idea where we would go or how we would survive." Yates took her hand, pressing a kiss to her wedding ring. "And now?" She looked around at their home, at the children safe and thriving, at the man who had become everything to her. "Now I know it was just beginning, the real story, our story." Outside, the Montana winter wrapped the ranch in its cold embrace. But within the walls of the home they had built together, warmth and love abounded, a testament to the family forged not by blood but by choice, by courage, and by the unexpected meeting of two souls who found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it most. And in the years that followed, as their family grew and the ranch prospered, Madeline and Yates would sometimes reminisce about that desperate day in Deer Lodge, the day a fleeing woman with two frightened children heard the words that would change everything. "I have room for all of you." Simple words that had built a life, a family, a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives together.